Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you prepare to use Axe Handle Saturday, the film produced by the Jacksonville Historical Society to help teach about U.S. civil rights history, there are a few things that it might be helpful to consider and keep in mind and share with students. And one of them is that the incident that took place in Jacksonville on August 27th, 1960, 60 years ago this month, actually occurred at a dangerous moment in U.S. civil rights history. In the history of the civil rights movement and the movement for social justice more generally, we think of the 1960s as the years of victory and achievement. And they were in some key ways, but at the time of this incident, it was a very dangerous time for racial minorities, people of color, to demonstrate and to make any kind of an attempt to more prominently, more obviously, and more forcefully assert their equality as citizens in the United States. So it was in the context of that the first lunch counter sit-in took place in Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1st, 1960. A group of 4 college students, African Americans, sat down at a lunch counter at a Woolworths, a discount retail store in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they asked to be served coffee. Service was declined, and they continued to sit quietly and wait for service. Over the days that followed, they returned, and so did other demonstrators. And the sit-ins, as they came to be termed, attracted white resistance that resulted in violent attacks on the sit-in demonstrators. The demonstrators, being faithful to the practices of Dr. Martin Luther King, the nonviolent practices of the movement, did not return violence with violence, and their thought was that by allowing all of the violence to be perpetrated by whites, it would demonstrate to the world the justice of their cause. It did, and as the word spread, other demonstrations imitating that in Greensboro also spread. And by April of that year, Dr. King convened a conference that led to the creation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that helped lead these demonstrations and encouraged and supported them in other cities across the American South. In Jacksonville, that moment came in August of 1960. And here in Jacksonville, the organization that helped sponsor the demonstration that led to Axe Handle Saturday was the NAACP through its Youth Council. And every chapter of the NAACP had a youth council. The one here in Jacksonville was led by a Duval County school teacher named Rutledge Pearson. And if that name is familiar to you, it's because today there is a Duval County public school named for Rutledge Pearson, and this is why. Mr. Pearson animated the high school students in his class and helped ignite their enthusiasm to participate in action that would bring attention to their cause. And the details of what happened will be in the video that you're about to screen and share with your students shortly. But it's worth mentioning that public education and a public school teacher were part of this narrative, and they were part of what makes Jacksonville's aspect of this story particularly Jacksonville and particularly interesting. And it's also worth mentioning too that the incident that I mentioned that took place in Greensboro received widespread publicity. The one that took place in Jacksonville did not. And that's part of what makes this a distinctive Jacksonville story in a weird way, but in its own right. The local newspapers, the Florida Times-Union, the Jacksonville Journal, gave almost no news coverage to the event that wound up resulting in dozens of arrests and injuries to people, and actually should have made international news, but it didn't. And the reasons were that business people and elected officials were very averse to news coverage of racial violence because they thought that it made their city look unsafe. It made it look like it was possibly a dangerous place to do business. Chambers of Commerce were very keen to promote cities of the American South as places that were equal to northern cities in their hospitable climate for business, in their good quality education, and in all the other attributes that people look for when they're thinking about a place to relocate. And incidents such as Axe Handle Saturday told a very different story. And so the mayor of Jacksonville at the time, Hayden Burns, actually perpetrated a false story, a false narrative about the facts of Axe Handle Saturday. And you'll see what he said when you view the film in a few minutes. So it's worth sharing with students that this was a local example of a national story, something that was part of the broad arc of the movement for social justice in the United States during the peak years of the Civil Rights Movement. And it happened right here 60 years ago, August 27th, 2020. Enjoy the film.